Welcome to Lecture 8 on multimodality. Hopefully you've already watched the video that I put up about Web 2 and how the digital revolution has changed things. But let's start thinking about what this term multimodality means. So very simply, multimodality is part of this idea of transliteracy. So it's this ability to read and write and interact across a range of platforms, tools and media. So this is essentially words and pictures. And it's the sort of thing that we are now extremely familiar with. We're very used to having different modes of media being used together to give us the whole picture, to give us the whole story. So we can start with the very earliest types of communication, that face-to-face communication and broadcasting. So this is, back in the past when books and literacy weren't common, and the way that people communicated with one another was this canonical, this perfect form of face-to-face communication. So face-to-face communication between two people obviously is a dialogue, but we also have this notion of broadcasting being brought in as well, where we have one person talking to many. And of course that can still happen in analogue forms. So, it's not that we have to have a digital form for that. We don't need to have a medium. We can have a broadcasting form. It's not quite mass communication. Well, I suppose it depends on the size of the crowd, but as we can see from this painting here, we have one person who is who looks like an archbishop, who is so he's the guy sitting up high with the mitre hat on his head, and he's talking to the people who are all standing below. And, he is talking to them. There is not a conversation going on as such, although it does sort of slightly look like it with the guy in the foreground with the dark hat on, looks as though he is responding. But we have other people around there, and we are familiar with this type of broadcasting from the past, and even today. When you have some sort of religious spokesperson, a vicar, a pastor, priest, whatever, standing in front of their congregation and talking to them, and likewise lecturers and teachers talking to their classes. So it's that same sort of thing. So that doesn't require any media at all. There is no medium in between that's carrying their message. It's all done face to face, either with two people talking directly to one another and they're equal, or this broadcasting where one person is talking to many, and there's not quite the same, there isn't the same equality in response, because the audience don't really get to respond effectively. So we then move on from that into pictorial depiction, so a medium. So this is the medium that we start with in human history, this pictorial depiction, so telling stories through images. And this, as we know from the first lecture in this module, this goes right back to our earliest human ancestors, people that lived in or near to caves, cave people, and that they put up drawings and paintings, some of which still survive inside the caves. But we also have, more recently, we have stained glass windows, and these are quite a lot of them are extremely ancient, and again they tell a story. They tell Bible stories generally. Occasionally they might tell some myths and legends, but generally they're Bible stories. And this was the opportunity for again, in a religious setting, for the priest to be able to explain stories to their congregation with the aid of pictures. those stained glass windows. So then we finally move on to actually having books, and that's where multimodality starts. Because now we actually have a medium with words and pictures. So, the stained glass windows before, they're only using one mode as medium. Yes, you may well have had somebody standing next to them and telling a story that was depicted on there, and arguably, that's multimodal, but in a form that lots of people can actually access in a very simple way is the book, and it's where we have words and pictures. There is a multimodality going on there because we're using different forms of communication, different modes of communication that are happening in one place. So we have the mode of writing and we have the mode of pictures. So this has continued right on in to our digital world and into the internet. Excuse me. And this particular screenshot, as you can see, is taken from the BBC, and it's from 12 years ago. So the BBC News website doesn't look quite like this anymore, but it's still recognisable to us. But we have multiple modes existing on this page, and this is what the digital revolution has really given us. We can have not just words and pictures as we had in books, but we can now actually have moving images, as we can see the central image there of the Obama family. We can see that there is also that triangle. There are two of them that we know actually if we press on that triangle symbol, then the video will start playing. So that tells us, because we're familiar with that symbol, that tells us that this is a video clip and not still image. So we have moving images now able to be shown on computer screens, tablets, mobile phone screens. And as well as those video images, we also have we have more interactive aspects, different interactive elements on this screen. So the map of the United States over on the right hand side. I don't know whether it still works, but certainly when this page was up online on the BBC, and it was still there up until fairly recently. As I say, I'm not sure whether now in 2020 it's still completely interactive. Do go and have a look when we take the first break in a few moments. But it used to be the case that you were able to actually click on individual states and see what the returns had been and how what amount of votes Obama got compared to the amount of votes that the then Republican candidate John McCain, what he got. In comparison. So, you can see all of that. You can see the name of the senator who won that particular state. So we have that on there that obviously takes us to I think it's a pop-up that gives us the details. But we also have over on the left-hand side, we have the whole column that gives us the opportunity to go elsewhere, but to stay within this particular website, so we can go and get news from around the world. And we also have further down on the left hand side, as it says there, we've got video and audio, have your say, magazine in pictures, country profiles and special reports. So we've got other things as well that are all related to the news that this website offers. So this, of course, is key to websites in as much as they want to keep the viewer, the reader, the audience, they want to keep us on that site for as long as possible. And this is largely, not in the case of the BBC, but largely because the thing that drives or funds websites is, particularly news websites on the whole, is advertising. And this is the same from original sort of hard copy print newspapers. Again, the thing that actually pays for the newspaper is the advertising. And that's regardless of which newspaper it is. They are all paid for by their advertising, even though they have a cover price for a lot of them. But that cover price does not fund all of the additional things that newspapers do, and never has really funded the running of a newspaper. It's always been the case that newspapers have carried adverts because the advertisers know that this information, particularly if it's a reliable, a very sort of well respected and well read newspaper, advertisers know that they are going to have their advert in front of so many thousands of readers. And even if we're not actively looking at those adverts, we are still passively taking them in. So all of this adds to this multimodal form of reading that we have. So we have from websites, we have images, we have moving images and still images, we have interactive elements, and we also have additional links where we can go elsewhere onto the same website. And also at the top there we have the details of where you can email this page to a friend, and we also have a printable version because people, particularly back in 2008, still preferred to actually read things on paper rather than on a screen. Obviously screens have changed in the last 12 years, but also one of the things that you may have noticed that's missing is that we don't have any social media links on there, and that's because if you paid attention to the video, you'll know that the web has changed, and we are now more connected, and a lot of those connections have now been driven by social media. So, and of course, that's nowadays where most of us are likely to get our news too. We'll see links to the BBC, to CNN, to Sky News, or wherever, giving us different news stories. So we've become very much more eclectic in our news tastes. It used to be the case that people would either just watch the 10 o'clock news on ITV or BBC, or they would get a daily newspaper delivered, or they would listen to the radio. And again, it would be a particular radio channel that people would listen to, as we still do. And all of those things still happen, but what's key now is that most of us are getting our news from social media, and that's become our main channel, and we're allowed then to pick and choose which news sources we use. And as I'm sure you're aware, that can be quite problematic. So this is how things have changed considerably now. We have the picture at the top there, we have that's taken from a radio broadcast, and a number of people there sitting around a table actually having a chat, and that even the radio broadcasts now are often accompanied by filmed sections. If you follow the journalist and broadcaster James O'Brien from LBC, you'll know that actually one of the reasons why he's become so well known is not because LBC is a particularly well known channel. LBC stands for the London Broadcasting Company, I think. But it used to be LBC was just a London-based radio show. Now, because of digitalisation, that radio show and that radio channel can be listened to all over the globe. And on top of that, James O'Brien is particularly outspoken against the government, and is quite sort of argumentative about things, so people quite like tuning into him. And we can listen asynchronously. We don't have to listen whilst it's live. We can listen when we choose to, but also LBC now actually films actually the broadcasts, so we can watch as well. And then the picture at the top there, at the bottom, of course, BBC News 24. So that's the other thing. The news has changed because it is now 24 hours. We no longer have to wait for, an hourly update on the radio, or to wait until the sort of the news at 5:45, which used to be the thing when I was a kid, that, my dad would come home and the news at 5:45 would go on. And then of course the news at 10. So, it used to be the case that people would have to wait for particular times. And of course, this was before we were able to start viewing things on demand and before the internet. And then the final image there on the right hand side is a mobile phone update. So, we are actually we're pushed notifications if we choose to have them. So we get notifications on our mobile phones as soon as there's some sort of breaking news. So we're far more connected to the news, the media, and to one another. And it's done in this multimodal way. So we can't sort of get away from it. And that, of course, brings its own problems as well. So this notion of different modes and having all of this media is changing our lives, and certainly it's changing children's lives too. So this, as you can see, is from a quote from an article that came out in 2005 called Digital Beginnings, Young Children's Use of Popular Culture, Media and New Technologies. So, and you can see it comes from the Literacy Research Centre at the University of Sheffield. So this is really quite important, even though it's 15 years old and things have changed, but what they say is, as I say, quite important. So 15 years ago, so this will be very much those of you who are undergrads, who are second year undergrads taking this module, who started uni at the age of sort of 18, 19. This is you. This is your generation. So 19% of you started watching TV by the age of 6 months. 59% of you had done so before you were 1 year old. That is very new. And, you very much are the media generation in a way that previous generations before have not been. And then they also go on and talk about before children get to school, over 70% of children turn on the TV by themselves by the age of 2. Now, think about that for a moment. Can you remember what age you were when you turned on the TV by yourself? When you weren't with an adult, when an adult wasn't actually selecting the channel, turning on the TV. Choosing exactly what it was that you were going to be watching. How old were you when that happened? 45% of 3-year-olds can use a mouse to point and click. By age 6, 34% of children are looking at websites on their own. So, of course, we have things like net nannies and various different ways that we can attempt to moderate what children are seeing. And you may remember when we looked last week at the sort of the boundaries of media discourse. One of the things that I pointed out was, this idea of the watershed. So, things being more adult themes and language being used after 9 p.m, but also with things like, on television on demand, on the iPlayer and similar platforms, they often ask you, certainly the iPlayer does this, it asks you to confirm that you're over the age of 16. But of course, it's not beyond a 6 or 7-year-old to read that and to lie and say, yes, of course I'm over 16, I want to watch this TV programme. So, and this of course is the big problem, that once children are able to do these, to interact with media on their own, it means that nobody is actually guiding them anymore. Nobody is talking to them about what they're seeing. And that, of course, potentially leads to misunderstandings and problems for the child. And as an interesting aside, last year, one of our third years, as their dissertation, their final year dissertation, they actually wrote about this problem with broadcasting, and they looked specifically at how the BBC are managing um, children and managing their communications online with children. And they did extremely well in their dissertation. They got a first, and I think they might actually have won the prize last year for the best dissertation. But very, very interesting stuff. And actually, the things that this particular student had done were unique, new bits of research that had never been done before. So yeah, it was really good. Okay, so why should we bother to concern ourselves with the digital? Well, aside from the fact that it may be doing things to our children, aside from that, um, we need to be thinking about what it does to us as well. As it says there, 90% of all media interactions are screen based, and this is from a study done 8 years ago. So things have only increased. And only 10% of all media interactions are non-screen based. Only 10%. And on average, we spend 4.4 hours of our leisure time in front of screens each day. So that was 8 years ago. We're going to take a break now. And during that break, go and see if you can find out how many hours we spend now of our leisure time in front of screens. Okay, and we'll come back in a moment.